Thousands of people in Nigeria's Niger Delta region are suing the oil giant Shell over alleged damage to their communities. They hope to convince a British court that Shell's oil exploration activities have polluted their rivers and underground water supplies. Towns in the Niger Delta say they have had no access to clean water for decades. Our correspondent, Flourish Chukbura, sent this report from Ogale.
Life in Ogale is tough. Blessing James has lived here with her husband for 5 years. Everything is hard to come by, including clean water.
I'm not happy now because this is suffer. Because under this heavy sun now, pass through now, come and fetch water here. Well, I'm supposed to have my own water in my house.
Ogale is a community in Ogoni land, part of Nigeria's oil-rich Niger Delta. Big oil multinationals like Shell have explored the area for decades. Pollution from oil spills has left the groundwater and rivers contaminated. This is the Ogoni River in Niger Delta, and if you look closely, you can see oil at the surface of the water, and also some fish have been washed off the shore as a result of the pollution. This water is completely useless. Even though people can see water here, they actually have no access to clean water. This community used to rely on fishing, but with this level of pollution, their source of food, income and water has vanished.
This water is no good, and when we fed this water like this, even when you use it for bath, the soap will no foam. Even when you use it for wash, the tea will no foam. Even if you use it for cooking, we hear the smelling.
The United Nations Environmental Programme ran tests on the water in Ogale. It found levels of cancer-causing benzene to be 900 times higher than the levels permitted by the World Health Organization. Scientists also found 8 centimeters of refined oil on the groundwater, which feeds the wells that people drink from. Local authorities have warned people to not drink the contaminated water, but many, like Blessing, have no choice, and they are forced to live with the damage to their health.
That's why you see most times we see the levels of cancer prevalence is increasing. We are seeing the age of people coming down with cancer decreasing. Before you see cancer cases from 50, 60, 70 years, but now you see children coming down with cancer 8, 10, 15, 20.
The government provided water stations across the village to supply clean water from other communities, but none of the stations has worked for years. Local authorities admit that they have not done enough, but say the responsibility for solving the crisis lies elsewhere.
What we do as local government and state government is just to support services, but the main issue is with the federal government.
While politicians in Nigeria play the blame game and argue over whose responsibility it is to provide clean water for the people of Ogale, others have taken the matter into their own hands, like traditional leader King Emere Godwin Okpabi. He has listed 14,000 individual cases of the damage caused by Shell's oil spillage and is seeking compensation in court in the UK, where the company is based.
There are big people that receive dividend, and they sit down and enjoy the money, and their children, their grandchildren is enjoying the money. I want to tell them that money is blood money. That money is blood money. As you're using the money to get comfort for you, your children, and your dependent, so our children of Ogale are dying.
The case could take years. In that time, Nigeria and Shell will continue to profit from Ogale's oil, while people like Blessing James will continue to suffer the consequences of the contaminated water they are forced to drink.
Let's talk a bit more about water with Maria Talla. She's the head of the Nature for Climate branch at the UN Environment Programme and joins me from Nairobi. Welcome. So according to UN data, a quarter of the world's population does not have access to safe drinking water. That's 2 billion people. To what degree does contaminated water, like in our example earlier, contribute to that staggering number?
Hello, Gerhard, and a pleasure to be with you. Hi to everyone from Nairobi. Indeed, pollution, contamination actually comes in many forms. It can be invisible. It can be in the form of chemicals or microbes or antibiotics. Recently, we've had a summit on antimicrobial resistance because of the contamination of water resources, both surface water and underground water resources, and their contamination with antibiotics and different types of chemicals. Pollution and contamination also comes in the form of chemical contamination and in the form of pathogenic contamination. I think this is a very critical aspect. This is why we are having resurgence of typhoid, cholera, and other waterborne diseases all around the world. So by way of comparison with the 2 billion, with the number that you mentioned of 2 billion people not having, being affected by water contamination, just from contamination from arsenic, we count 220 million people. And that, as you know, leads to cognitive development issues and so on. Half of the world population lacks access to sanitation. In lay people's terms, that means half of the world's population does not have access to toilets.
To a toilet, yeah.
And so that is also the amount of, that is also the number of people that is affected directly by contamination from defecation and other human refuse.
I understand.
So
let me just briefly interrupt you there. I would like to talk about solutions briefly. At the UN Water Conference that concludes in New York today, the largest ever initiative was launched to restore degraded rivers, lakes and wetlands. Will this make a difference, you think?
We certainly hope so, and we were very pleased to see this happen under the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration that was launched in 2019. The first reason why we're very happy for that to happen is because ecosystem restoration was very often equated to planting trees. We know that ecosystems are more complex, and freshwater ecosystems, half of freshwater ecosystems around the world are either degraded or polluted or affected by some sort of human encroachment. This initiative is very, very critical, not only to address pollution issues, but also to address water shortages, extreme floods and climate change impacts. If you think about wetlands, for instance, in the 1970s, over 1/3 of the world's wetlands were drained to release land for agriculture purposes and agriculture production. And in that sense, wetlands had not been acknowledged for the ecosystem services that they provide. They are like a sponge in the environment, in the ecosystem. They absorb water when there's too much and they release it when there's too little. They also help water seep into the ground slowly, and they depollute water resources as well, because many of the reeds that grow in wetlands are reeds that have the ability to absorb heavy metals and different type of pollutants. So we're very, very optimistic about this initiative and hopeful that it will not only help improve access to water resources, but also buffer the impacts of climate change in the medium and long term.
Maria Talla there with the UN Environment Programme. Thank you.